The chamber was tense, the kind of silence that hums beneath the surface before an earthquake splits the ground. Cameras flashed like lightning bolts, catching every raised brow, every tightened jaw. Senator Lisa Murkowski leaned forward, her words cutting through the heavy air with the precision of a blade. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't need to. Her jab was swift, almost surgical, questioning Jasmine Crockett's political career as though it were nothing more than a fragile paper boat drifting on turbulent waters. The sting of the remark rippled instantly. Gasps scattered across the room like a chorus of shock. A few whispered laughs slipped from one side of the aisle, too smug to hide, too brazen to care. On the other side, jaws clenched, eyes widened, and murmurs carried like sparks across dry kindling. This wasn't just a jab. This was an invitation to a duel, broadcast in real time, framed in flashing bulbs, destined to be replayed endlessly in living rooms, newsrooms, and timelines across America. For a fleeting moment, it seemed the attack might linger unanswered, its weight pressing down on the chamber. Murkowski sat back, the faintest smirk tugging at her lips, as though she had landed the decisive strike. Reporters in the gallery scribbled furiously, some already crafting headlines that hinted at Crockett's silence, Crockett's hesitation, Crockett's undoing. But then, Jasmine raised her head. Her eyes, sharp and steady, scanned the room. Not hurried, not defensive, but deliberate. The whispers grew louder, a current of anticipation pulling everyone closer to the edge of their seats. Was she about to let it pass? Would she deflect, retreat, fold under the weight of experience and seniority? Or would she do what only the boldest politicians dare, flip the script in the most public of arenas? A murmur rose like a wave, swelling, restless. Jasmine's hand brushed across the papers on her desk, but she didn't need them. Her posture straightened, her presence expanding until the chamber itself seemed smaller in comparison. Every lens tightened its focus. Every breath waited for release. And in that heartbeat before she spoke, before history tilted, the tension was unbearable. Because what came next was not a response, it was a reversal. A turning of tables so swift, so piercing, it would leave the chamber gasping, the internet ablaze, and the narrative forever changed. But no one expected what Jasmine would unleash next. The Senate hearing wasn't just another day of testimony, it was theater at the highest level, the kind that shapes headlines, hardens perceptions, and shifts power. The room itself carried history in its wood-paneled walls and the weight of decisions that had rippled across generations. Every senator knew the stakes, every reporter knew the cameras were rolling, and every citizen watching at home understood that something bigger than policy was at play. Jasmine Crockett wasn't supposed to be here, not according to the unwritten rules of Washington. She hadn't climbed the traditional ladder, hadn't bowed to the establishment's pace. She came from a different world, one where grit mattered more than pedigree, where survival taught lessons no Ivy League seminar could. Her voice carried the cadence of lived struggle, the kind that resonates with people who felt ignored by polished politics. To her supporters, she wasn't just a representative, she was proof that someone like them could stand in this chamber, stare down the powerful, and refuse to shrink. Across from her sat Lisa Murkowski, a name etched deep into the granite of the establishment. A senator who had weathered political storms, outlasted challengers, and carved her place as part of America's governing fabric. She wielded power the way some wield tradition, with quiet confidence, unshaken by the tides of the moment. For years, Murkowski had embodied the Senate's rhythm, measured, deliberate, cautious. And in many ways, she represented what Jasmine Crockett was rebelling against, an older generation of politics that defined respect by seniority, not by substance. That's what made this exchange so explosive. It wasn't just Murkowski questioning a colleague's political career. It was the establishment flexing its authority against a rising challenger. A clash of eras. A collision of identities. On one side, the embodiment of Washington longevity, on the other, the sharp-edged defiance of a younger, black congresswoman who carried her community's frustrations into the halls of power. The stakes weren't confined to their exchange. They radiated outward, pulling at the threads of America's most raw divides. Race hung in the air, silent but undeniable. Gender sharpened the edge, women facing women, but under rules historically written by men. Generational tension fueled the fire, boomer patience against millennial urgency. And beneath it all, the question of respect: who gets to demand it, who must earn it, and who has been denied it for far too long. The crowd in the chamber felt it, even if unspoken. The smirks from Murkowski's allies weren't just about Jasmine personally, they echoed a long history of dismissal toward outsiders, particularly women of color, who dared to speak with authority in rooms built to exclude them. For Jasmine, this wasn't just a test of her career, it was a test of whether her very presence could be diminished to a punchline. But here's the truth: Jasmine Crockett had been underestimated before. She had been told wait your turn, had been mocked as too loud, too raw, too unapologetic. Yet every time, she had turned those doubts into fuel. That was her weapon, an energy that didn't shrink. To understand why Lisa Murkowski's words landed with such cutting precision, one has to understand the story of Lisa herself. She is not a fringe figure in American politics, nor is she a newcomer scrambling for a spotlight. She is a senator forged in the cold permanence of Alaska's politics, a survivor of political battles that would have ended the careers of most. In Washington, she is regarded as someone who knows how the game is played, and how to win it. Murkowski's rise was not without controversy. Her initial path to the Senate was paved not through the will of the people but through the hand of her father, Frank Murkowski, then the governor of Alaska. When he appointed her to fill his own vacated seat, critics cried nepotism. The whispers of entitlement haunted her early years. But Lisa, steady and calculating, weathered the storm. She campaigned hard, clawed her way into legitimacy, and eventually secured her place by earning votes outright. Still, the stain of that beginning never fully washed away. To many, she has always been the senator who was handed her start. Yet, paradoxically, that same origin story is what hardened her. It gave her a certain chip on the shoulder, a need to prove herself not just as her father's daughter but as a power in her own right. Over the years, she mastered the art of political endurance, outlasting rivals, cultivating cross-party credibility, and carving out a brand as a pragmatic centrist in a deeply divided Senate. To her admirers, Murkowski is steady, reasonable, a rare voice of moderation in an era of extremes. But to her critics, she is the embodiment of the establishment, safe, cautious, and protective of the hierarchies that keep voices like Jasmine Crockett's at the margins. That duality defines her power. She presents herself as approachable, unflappable, the kind of senator who listens politely before quietly making the decision that serves her longevity. But beneath that polished exterior lies a sharper instinct: survival at all costs. When the Republican Party veered hard right, she found ways to resist just enough to maintain her independence while never straying so far as to lose her seat. When challengers threatened, she leaned on her reputation, her family name, and the network she had built over decades. And in moments of crisis, she has always managed to play the role of gatekeeper, deciding who is led into the halls of legitimacy and who remains on the fringes. That's the role she played the day she went after Jasmine Crockett. To Murkowski, this was not just banter. It was a ritual of hierarchy. In her world, respect isn't given freely, it is earned through years of service, through the patience of waiting your turn, through the scars of political survival. So when a younger, bolder, unapologetically defiant congresswoman stood before her, Murkowski's instinct was not to embrace, but to diminish. Her jab about Crockett's political career was not merely a comment. It was a reminder: I have been here. I am the one who decides who belongs. This is the arrogance of establishment power, not always shouted, but carried in the quiet certainty that time and tenure make one untouchable. Murkowski's confidence comes not just from her years in office, but from her survival of battles that would have destroyed others. She famously lost her Republican primary in 2010, only to claw back victory as a write-in candidate, one of the most improbable comebacks in modern American politics. That triumph gave her a reputation as nearly invincible. Who could touch a senator who had beaten the system itself? To her supporters, it was proof of her resilience. To her detractors, it was evidence of her entitlement. Murkowski always finds a way to bend the system in her favor. But power carries a cost, and arrogance often blinds those who wield it. For all of Murkowski's polish, there is a growing perception that she is out of step with the urgency of the moment. The younger generation, embodied by voices like Jasmine Crockett's, doesn't have patience for gatekeepers who demand respect before offering it. They see Murkowski's composure as detachment, her pragmatism as complacency, her survival instinct as self-preservation rather. Before Jasmine Crockett ever stood in the halls of power, before the cameras followed her words, she was already a fighter. Not because she sought prestige, but because life gave her no other choice. Born and raised in Dallas, Jasmine grew up in a world where the odds were rarely stacked in her favor. She wasn't handed a seat, she wasn't lifted by a famous name. Every inch of ground she gained, she clawed for with grit, intelligence, and a fire that could not be extinguished. Her story begins not with politics, but with justice. Long before anyone knew her name, Jasmine Crockett was a public defender. In that unforgiving arena, where those without wealth or power face a system that too often presumes them guilty, she saw the truth of America's inequality. Day after day, she represented the forgotten, young men thrown into the pipeline of mass incarceration, women ignored by courts that never heard their voices, immigrants living in fear of deportation. For Jasmine, these weren't just cases, they were lives. And in fighting for them, she found her calling. But it was never easy. The courtroom is not kind to women who refuse to bow, and it is especially cruel to Black women who bring both intellect and passion to the fight. Judges dismissed her. Opposing counsel mocked her. Colleagues whispered that she was too emotional, too aggressive, too much. Yet Jasmine never shrank. Each insult, each barrier, each smirk from an establishment voice only deepened her resolve. If they wanted her quiet, she would be louder. If they wanted her small, she would stand taller. Her rise was built in the grassroots trenches. While others polished their careers in boardrooms and donor circles, Jasmine was in church basements, community centers, and on street corners. She listened. She rallied. She showed up when families were grieving, when workers were striking, when neighborhoods were demanding to be heard. Her politics weren't abstract, they were personal. They came from a lived reality of injustice and the relentless conviction that no one, no matter how marginalized, should be left behind. It was that fire that carried her into elected office. First at the state level, where her voice cut through the noise with unapologetic clarity. Then, into the national stage, where she quickly became one of the most recognizable, outspoken, and unflinching members of Congress. Jasmine Crockett did not come to Washington to blend in. She came to shake the walls, to speak truth to power, to make the establishment uncomfortable if that's what it took to move the needle toward justice. But every step came with resistance. There were those who questioned whether she belonged. Some tried to pigeonhole her as just another activist. Others sneered at her boldness, dismissing her as inexperienced. Yet what they failed to see was that her defiance wasn't born of naivety, it was born of survival. When you fought for justice in a system designed to silence the vulnerable, walking into the Senate chamber is not intimidating. It is simply another battlefield. What makes Jasmine different is not only her willingness to fight, but who she fights for. She is not defending her ego, or her career, or her personal ambition. She is carrying the voices of those who have been dismissed their entire lives. When she speaks with the weight of millions who are told they are too much, too loud, too angry. Her fight is their fight. Her resilience is their resilience. Her victories are proof that barriers can be broken, not just for her, but for all who follow. And that is why the clash with Lisa Murkowski mattered. On the surface, it was just a senator taking a jab at a younger colleague. But beneath it, the stakes were generational, cultural, and deeply personal. Murkowski represented the gatekeepers, the ones who decide who gets to belong. Jasmine represented the challengers, the ones who are no longer waiting for permission to enter. It was a clash of eras, of identities, of visions for what leadership should mean in America. Jasmine's journey into that chamber wasn't built on entitlement. It was built on sacrifice. There were sleepless nights spent preparing cases that no one believed she could win. There were campaigns fought with limited resources but endless determination. There were losses, setbacks, betrayals, and moments of exhaustion when quitting might have seemed easier. But Jasmine never quit. Because she knew quitting wasn't just about her, it would mean quitting on the communities that depended on her to fight when no one else would. That is what makes her so dangerous to the establishment. They can dismiss her, mock her, even try to silence her, but they cannot outlast her. She has weathered storms far fiercer than a senator's sneer. She has built a career not on shortcuts or privilege, but on the unshakable foundation of service and struggle. And so, when Lisa Murkowski delivered her jab, when she tried to reduce Jasmine's political career to a punchline, it was not just an insult to Jasmine. It was an insult to everyone who has ever been told they are not enough, to every community dismissed as insignificant, to every movement told to wait its turn. That is why this moment resonated. It wasn't just about two women in a chamber trading words. It was about a battle for respect, a collision between old power and new voices, between entitlement and earned grit. Jasmine Crockett did not walk into that chamber unarmed. She carried with her the weight of her journey, the strength of her resilience, and the fire of millions who refused to be silenced. And it was that fire she carried into the chamber when Murkowski struck. The air in the chamber was already charged when Lisa Murkowski leaned in, her words carrying the sharp edge of condescension. With a slight smirk, she jabbed again at Jasmine Crockett's political career, the phrase dripping with the kind of dismissive tone that signaled not debate, but belittlement. To Murkowski, this was not just a disagreement on policy. This was a subtle assertion of hierarchy. I've been here longer, I know more, you are just a newcomer. The room shifted. Senators glanced at each other, aides froze in place, and the gallery leaned forward. Murkowski wasn't shouting, she didn't have to. Her power was in the quiet arrogance of her phrasing, the almost casual way she cut down a colleague as if swatting away an annoyance. It was the kind of rhetorical maneuver meant to sting while seeming sophisticated, a velvet glove covering the steel of contempt. Congresswoman Crockett, Murkowski said, her tone measured, almost patronizing, your experience is, well, let's say, limited. Perhaps one day, when you've served long enough, you'll understand the complexities of governing rather than grandstanding. Gasps whispered through the chamber. The remark wasn't just a jab, it was a dismissal of Crockett's very legitimacy. Murkowski had framed her as little more than an amateur, a loud voice without substance. But Jasmine did not flinch. She didn't roll her eyes, didn't let her body language betray the fire that was clearly igniting within her. Instead, she remained still, posture straight, eyes locked on Murkowski with unbroken focus. That composure, in itself, was a counterpunch, because silence in the face of condescension speaks louder than any hasty retort. Murkowski, sensing her words hadn't rattled Crockett, pressed further. Her tone grew sharper, clipped, as she layered on the weight of her years in office. I've seen countless eager voices come through these chambers, she said, full of passion, yes, but passion without wisdom can be dangerous. Experience matters. Judgment matters. And frankly, so does respect for the institution. There it was, the gatekeeper's card. Murkowski wasn't merely criticizing Crockett's politics, she was framing herself as the guardian of tradition, the elder stateswoman protecting the dignity of the Senate from the reckless energy of youth. It was not policy versus policy. It was authority versus audacity. For a moment, it seemed as though Murkowski's words had tilted the balance. The establishment weight of her decades in office bore down on the chamber, and some in the room nodded subtly, as though affirming the hierarchy. This was how power maintained itself, not by overt domination, but by the quiet erosion of another's legitimacy. But Crockett still didn't take the bait. She sat with deliberate patience, as though letting Murkowski's words hang long enough for their sharpness to become visible to everyone in the room. The silence stretched, and the longer it went on, the more palpable the tension became. Viewers at home watching clips of the exchange later would remark on it, the stillness before Jasmine's response. The weight of that pause. It was the silence before the storm. Murkowski tried once more, her voice tightening. Frankly, Congresswoman, it would serve you well to listen more and speak less. You might find that real progress isn't made through fiery sound bites, but through patient, measured service. That was the breaking point, the attempt to silence. It wasn't just dismissing Crockett's career, it was telling her that her voice, her fire, her perspective, didn't belong in that chamber. It was the age-old dismissal women, especially women of color, have faced for generations. Know your place. Stay quiet until you've earned the right to speak. And that was when Jasmine moved. Slowly, deliberately, she leaned forward, breaking her stillness for the first time. Her voice, when it came, was calm, measured, but carrying the unmistakable edge of conviction. She did not match Murkowski's tone with anger, nor did she lash out with raw emotion. Instead, she wielded precision. Her words cut not because they were loud, but because they were undeniable. She began by acknowledging the implication that her political career was young, that she had not sat in those seats as long as Murkowski. But then she reframed it, "Senator, you're right, I haven't been here as long. But maybe that's why I can see what others have grown too comfortable to admit." A murmur rippled through the chamber. The silence hung heavy, like the moment before a thunderclap. Every eye in the chamber was fixed on Jasmine Crockett as she leaned forward, her hands resting lightly on the desk, her gaze unwavering. Murkowski had spoken with the confidence of someone who believed her words would land like finality. But Crockett's pause, the deliberate patience of it, signaled that the debate wasn't ending. It was just beginning. When Crockett finally spoke, her voice was low, measured. Not a shout, not a roar, but a steady fire. "Senator," she began, the single word crisp and resonant, "you're absolutely right about one thing. My career here is young. I haven't sat in these halls for decades. I haven't had the privilege of inheriting power and holding onto it like a family heirloom. No, I had to fight my way here, step by step, barrier by barrier, stereotype by stereotype." The room shifted. Some senators glanced down at their papers, uncomfortable. Others leaned forward, sensing the spark of something about to ignite. Crockett paused, allowing the weight of her words to linger. Then her voice rose, gathering force. "I didn't walk into this chamber on the shoulders of entitlement. I walked in with the voices of people who have been silenced for generations echoing behind me. I came here because for too long, the so-called wisdom of experience has meant protecting the powerful while ignoring the powerless. And if my passion makes you uncomfortable, then good. That means you've been comfortable for far too long." The first ripple of applause broke from the gallery. It wasn't thunderous yet, but it was there, audible, undeniable. Murkowski stiffened, visibly taken aback. This wasn't the shaky, defensive retort she might have expected. This was something else, something larger. Crockett wasn't just defending herself, she was turning the attack inside out, reframing the entire narrative. She leaned in further, her eyes locked like steel. "You call my experience limited? Let me tell you what limited looks like. Limited is believing that leadership is defined by how many years you've sat in a chair rather than how many lives you've actually changed. Limited is thinking that patience means waiting quietly while injustice continues unchallenged. Limited is assuming that a new voice has less value than an old one simply because it hasn't echoed in these halls as long." The chamber erupted, some gasps, some scattered applause, even a few shouts of approval. Reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras zoomed in. This was no longer a routine debate, this was a historic confrontation. Crockett let the reaction swell, then cut through it with her voice rising sharper, fiercer. "My so-called inexperience? It's the very reason I can see clearly. Because I haven't been dulled by decades of compromise. I haven't traded truth for convenience or principle for power. What you call inexperience, I call integrity." Another pause. A wave of applause stronger this time. Murkowski's expression hardened, but the confidence in her eyes faltered. Crockett pressed on, her voice now infused with raw emotion. "I didn't grow up believing this place would ever welcome me. A black woman, the daughter of working-class parents, fighting for a chance to even be heard. Do you know what it means to walk into rooms where people like me have always been told to wait their turn? To be told that your passion is a liability, your urgency a weakness? To have your very presence questioned at every step? Her words struck deep. Murkowski's dismissal was no longer about one woman's political career, it now symbolized generations of silenced voices. Crockett's rebuttal had become bigger than herself. Respect, she continued, her voice booming now, isn't earned by time served, it's earned by truth spoken. And if you think I came here to wait in line while the same broken politics keeps failing the people I serve, then, Senator, you've misjudged me. The chamber exploded in applause, this time loud, sustained, and unstoppable. Some aides clapped discreetly, others openly cheered. Even a few lawmakers on the periphery shifted uncomfortably, caught between decorum and awe. Murkowski's face flushed. She shifted in her chair, glanced down at her notes, then back up, visibly rattled. The authority she had wielded so effortlessly minutes before was slipping. The spotlight had moved, and it wasn't hers anymore. Crockett wasn't finished. You talk about respect for this institution? Respect isn't about preserving your seat of power. Respect is about using this platform to serve those who will never step foot inside these walls. Respect is about courage, not comfort. And I will not apologize for speaking with urgency when people's lives, livelihoods, and futures are on the line. The force of her words was undeniable. She was no longer merely countering Murkowski, she was rewriting the rules of the exchange. Then came the mic drop moment. Crockett leaned back slightly, her voice lowering but sharpened with precision. You may see me as the newcomer. But Senator, what you call a career, I call a calling. And I will never, ever be silent in the face of condescension, whether it comes from the other side of the aisle, or from someone sitting right next to me. The gallery erupted, cheers, clapping, some even standing. The chamber, normally restrained, was alive with energy. Reporters immediately fired off tweets and headlines. Phones lit up. The exchange was no longer just a debate, it was viral history in the making. Murkowski sat frozen, her lips pressed into a thin line, her composure cracking under the weight of what had just unfolded. The condescension that had once seemed effortless now looked brittle, transparent. Crockett, on the other hand, didn't bask in the applause. She simply straightened her papers, adjusted her microphone, and sat back with the calm of someone who knew she had said what needed to be said. The crowd reaction told the rest of the story, shock at her boldness, disbelief at her courage, and admiration at her ability to flip the power dynamic so completely. What began as a dismissal had become a declaration. And as the noise in the chamber echoed across the country, one truth became clear: Murkowski hadn't just underestimated Jasmine Crockett. She had underestimated the hunger for voices like hers. And within minutes, the internet exploded. The debate chamber was still humming from Jasmine Crockett's thunderous rebuttal when the outside world began to catch fire. Within minutes, phones across the gallery buzzed and screens lit up. Journalists tweeted furiously, their headlines competing to capture the spectacle. Crockett stuns Senate floor, freshman lawmaker silences veteran, a political career reframed in real time. But it was social media where the explosion truly began. Hashtags surged into trending territory within the hour, hashtag Crockett flips the debate, hashtag respect her, hashtag mic drop moment. Users on X, formerly Twitter, clipped her final words, what you call a career, I call a calling, and replayed them endlessly, each share amplifying her defiance like an echo ricocheting across the nation. On TikTok, the moment took on a life of its own. Edits paired Crockett's fiery pauses with dramatic sound effects and slow-motion zooms. One viral video set her mic drop line to a booming bass drop, racking up over 3 million views in a matter of hours. Another split-screened her exchange with Murkowski alongside young women and girls recording their reactions, eyes widening, fists pumping, tears welling. For many, this wasn't just political theater, it was personal validation. YouTube channels quickly uploaded highlight reels, complete with commentary. Independent creators dissected her every phrase, noting the cadence, the timing, the precision with which she dismantled Murkowski's condescension. Some political commentators compared her composure to Barack Obama's early Senate speeches, others to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's viral committee takedowns. Yet a common theme emerged across platforms: Crockett had transformed what looked like a dismissal into a declaration of power. Cable news wasn't far behind. By evening, networks replayed the exchange in split screens, analysts leaning forward in their chairs. On CNN, a panelist remarked, "This was more than a rebuttal, it was a realignment." Crockett spoke not just for herself but for every underdog who's ever been underestimated. On MSNBC, a host called it a defining moment in a young career that just became impossible to ignore. Even on Fox, where the commentary was more cautious, a guest conceded, "You have to admit, she had the room." She flipped it, and she did it with precision. But perhaps the most telling reaction came not from pundits but from her rivals. Lawmakers who had once dismissed Crockett as a fiery newcomer began issuing careful statements about her compelling passion. A few even privately admitted to reporters that Murkowski had overplayed her hand. Crockett had turned the attack into a spotlight, and under that spotlight, she had flourished. The ripple effect stretched far beyond the political bubble. Teachers played clips of her speech in civics classes. College debate teams analyzed her rhetorical strategy, noting the blend of personal story, moral authority, and controlled emotion. Activist groups quickly seized the moment, weaving Crockett's words into fundraising emails and rallying cries. And ordinary people, millions of them, shared how the moment resonated with their own struggles. A nurse in Ohio posted, "This is what it feels like to be talked down to at work. Thank you, Jasmine, for showing how to rise above it." A single mother in Atlanta wrote, "She's not just talking for herself. She's talking for us." Crockett's inbox reportedly overflowed with messages of support, from college students to retired teachers, from grassroots organizers to everyday citizens who had never cared much for politics but recognized authenticity when they saw it. Meanwhile, Murkowski found herself in a far less favorable spotlight. Clips isolating her dismissive tone circulated alongside Crockett's triumphant rebuttal. Memes mocked the condescension with captions like, "When you underestimate the wrong woman," and "This didn't age well." What she had intended as a strike against Crockett's credibility had backfired spectacularly, reshaping the narrative around her own legacy. By the end of the week, the exchange was being described as a watershed moment. Commentators marveled at how swiftly one speech could shift public perception. Crockett wasn't just a rising star anymore, she had cemented her place in the national conversation. And yet, beneath all the headlines and viral edits, the true impact was subtler, deeper. It was the quiet ripple through living rooms, classrooms, and workplaces, where people who had long felt dismissed suddenly saw themselves reflected in the courage of a young lawmaker who refused to bow her head. The chamber had felt the force of her words. But the country, watching, sharing, talking, was now carrying them forward. And as the days passed, one question loomed over the frenzy: if Jasmine Crockett could flip a single debate so powerfully, what else was she capable of reshaping? As the dust settled and the hashtag slowly gave way to the next day's headlines, Jasmine Crockett's message began to crystallize. What had looked, in the heat of the moment, like a defense of her career was never really about her career at all. It was something larger, something universal. When she looked across the chamber at Lisa Murkowski, what she was confronting wasn't merely one senator's condescension. She was standing against a centuries-old pattern of voices being silenced, minimized, and dismissed. Her counterattack reframed the entire exchange. "This isn't about me," Crockett emphasized in follow-up interviews. "It's about every woman who has ever been told she doesn't belong. Every young leader who's been told to wait her turn. Every community that's been told their struggles don't matter. That's who I was speaking for." That framing resonated because it cut to something deeply human, the yearning to be seen and respected. It wasn't just women who recognized themselves in her words, it was immigrants, working-class families, young activists, and even older generations who remembered fighting their own uphill battles. Crockett had turned a pointed political jab into a universal parable: arrogance may dismiss, but dignity refuses to bow. The moral of the moment was as clear as it was powerful. Perseverance isn't just about surviving challenges, it's about transforming them into opportunities to reveal truth. Murkowski's attempt to undermine Crockett ended up becoming the stage upon which Crockett's brilliance could shine brightest. The lesson? Arrogance always invites its counterbalance. Dismissal always plants the seed of defiance. What made Crockett's response so striking wasn't just her passion, it was her composure. She didn't shout her way into respect. She earned it with facts, with poise, with a delivery so sharp that the silence after her words spoke louder than the applause that followed. That is the deeper truth embedded in the exchange. Brilliance doesn't need bluster. It speaks for itself, cutting through noise, bias, and arrogance with the clarity of conviction. In that sense, Crockett's mic drop wasn't just about politics, it was about life. Every workplace, every classroom, every kitchen table has seen versions of this moment: a younger voice dismissed by an older one, a fresh idea belittled by tradition, a person overlooked because of race, gender, or background. Crockett's stand turned into a metaphor. When you are underestimated, that's your stage. When you are dismissed, that's your invitation to redefine the conversation. Her resolution carried a timeless lesson: respect is not given, it is commanded by truth. Murkowski had relied on seniority, status, and power. Crockett had nothing but her words, her passion, and her conviction. Yet it was Crockett who left the room in command, reminding everyone that real authority comes not from titles but from authenticity. The broader takeaway was simple, yet profound: courage has ripple effects. When one person refuses to be silenced, they speak for thousands who feel they can't. Crockett's rebuttal didn't just elevate her, it lifted countless others who saw their own struggles mirrored in her moment of defiance. And so the resolution to this fiery exchange wasn't written in the applause, nor in the viral clips, but in the quiet confidence it inspired across the country. The moral was one for the ages: arrogance can dismiss a person, but it cannot erase their truth. Brilliance silences arrogance. Courage turns condescension into a stage. And in the end, dignity always outlasts dismissal. Jasmine Crockett walked out of that chamber not just as a defender of her political career, but as a reminder that when truth is spoken with clarity and courage, it doesn't just win debates, it reshapes the world around it. Because the real lesson is this: when brilliance meets arrogance, brilliance always cuts through. In the end, the irony could not have been sharper. Lisa Murkowski tried to belittle Jasmine Crockett's career, dismissing her as a political novice unworthy of attention. Yet in that very act, she amplified Crockett's brilliance for the world to see. What was intended as a cutting insult transformed into the spark that lit a fire far beyond the walls of the Senate chamber. This was never just a personal win for Jasmine Crockett. It wasn't about ego, titles, or political points. It was about resilience. It was about the courage to speak when others want you silent, the determination to stand tall when others hope you'll shrink, and the clarity to turn arrogance into an opportunity to demonstrate undeniable truth. And that's why this moment matters for all of us. Because the battle Crockett fought in that chamber mirrors battles happening everywhere: students dismissed by teachers, workers silenced by bosses, communities ignored by those in power. Her voice carried not just her own story, but the story of millions who know what it feels like to be underestimated. That's the universal message: brilliance will always outlast arrogance. Courage will always rise when it's needed most. Dignity cannot be erased. So here's the challenge to you: don't just watch this moment, carry it forward. If you believe in dignity over arrogance, in truth over dismissal, in voices like Jasmine Crockett's rising to be heard, then stand with her. Share this story. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And most of all, let her courage remind you of your own. Because when we amplify voices of resilience, we don't just